No, I was good. I could have responded again, but I was just wondering, like, oh, am I missing?
No, you're good. That's the
All
after
right.
pack. See, we'll have one edit point. Welcome. I'm Sam Petto. I'm the communications director at the ACLU of Nebraska, and with me is my favorite board member. They're all my favorite, Jason Whitmer. And this is a video series where we get a little more conversational about the issues that matter to everybody in a way that everybody can understand. And today we're talking about 18 days of action to stop solitary, which is really stopping torture. So Jason, I first learned about this seeing your Facebook page. So tell me a little bit about what this is and what it's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I'm part of a group, Unlock the Box is a nationwide group that deals with solitary confinement and all aspects of it because, as you know, Nebraska itself loves to do it. They rename solitary different names, take out some of the elements and feel that it's not solitary. If it's not absolute darkness and absolute cut off from all conditions of humane treatment, that it's not solitary, yet it still has the same effect.
Right, because they call it restrictive housing, right?
It was segregated. So I have a considerable amount of time in the prison system before I woke up. And then I still had some time, but I was waking up while I was in there, which I think was the best for me rather than getting out and thinking I'll just change. Changing in there, put some extra layers on my understanding of things, especially myself, which is what I mostly needed to deal with. And then coming out, I decided to become part of the change that happened to me in there, reach out to the community. And solitary confinement, I've never, ever seen it benefit. And coming out and going to speak in legislation, I would listen to, for instance, the Correctional Officers Union would come up and speak. And several correctional officers would speak about if we don't have the use of the whole, as it's called, that's a general term, the whole, but they like to call it restrictive housing now. If we don't have that, we can't control people. And yet, they don't tell the public if we don't have that, you will be less in danger.
Medical professionals in general say that solitary is dangerous, and it's because it's so harmful. And setting somebody in a 5x5 dark space for hours on end necessarily can't put you in the place that you need to be before you're re-entering.
There's grades your whole perspective on everything. And I've seen guys go from in there that seeming relatively normal, if that's a term we want to use, relatively normal, to literally, some of them literally like madmen you would see in a movie, covering themselves in their own feces, cutting themselves. Individuals, you get out the yard, and when they start getting a little erratic, you keep some distance because you don't know what's going to happen, and then people would reflect to how you behave. Like, I've never done them behaviors, yet I've done a considerable amount of time in the hole, or restrictive housing as they call it, and guys would talk about how angry I'd be, or sometimes you'd be yelling to yourself. I just heard that the other day, and I don't even remember that I have yelling conversations with myself, but I think that's how your mental health goes down, is you don't sit there and usually realize, hey, I'm going downhill. Because you're looking at the guy over there that's really off his rocker and thinking, I'm not like him, I'm good. And then I get out and I do what I do. But overwhelmingly, just personal experience, I just seen guys go downhill, and the way they deal with their reality outside of the segregation unit is much different. Mm-hmm. There's nothing positive about this. There's nothing progressive. There's nothing that builds somebody just enough that they can start catching on themselves to reform whatever they need to change and become a productive citizen.
The 18 days of action is about trying to build toward progress, and it honors Nelson Mandela, whose birthday was July 18th, which is like the kickoff, but who also spent 18 years in solitary confinement. And his story and his experience led to the United Nations accepting or creating this thing called the Mandela Rules, that basically says if you're spending more than 2 weeks straight in solitary, it's torture. And yet it happens like every day in the state, every day in different states across the nation. But we don't have to look far for like examples of where states have turned things around.
We went to Colorado prisons to look at their segregation units and what they'd done different, because at one time Colorado pretty much was all about Supermax. Lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. And they had that big event where the man got out. He was a white supremacist, and he went to, was it the deputy director? It was somebody real high up, and killed them. And instead of going,
home, right?
He went to the man's home and shot him and killed him. Usually that means a crackdown. Yet they was trying to change. They wanted to change, not just a crackdown. Where crackdown is what you do with the hole. You stick the people acting bad in the hole, and you don't have to deal with it for however long. Maybe out of term out of your position and your political position. Let everybody else deal with it. We won't even talk about it. They wanted to change. And so they started implementing the Nelson Mandela rules and aspects of that. You know, there needs to be high justification for over 15 days and whatnot. And so we went in there and we actually spoke to correctional officers. We spoke to people in administration. And I spent a lot of time speaking to the guys, because they had guys everywhere, and they've had guys in open sections of facilities, which were, you know, open yards, and they interact and whatnot, who've been involved in homicides like 5, 6, 7, 8 before this all implemented. And the guards would talk about it. I remember the intel guy would speak about one man who got into it with another person and killed that man in the chow hall, the cafeteria. And so this is somebody you'd be like, we're never going to see him on a yard. And why would we? Because he killed somebody in here after doing whatever he did on the street. And yet the intel guy, you know, he said, like, no, I've talked to this guy. We made we've negotiated, like, this is how things look. You know, how do you see your life? And they came to terms, and not using solitary confinement is part of them terms. He didn't agree to that. They just didn't use it no more. And he's like, this is like one of the best people in here that I know, because he honors his word. You know, he sticks to what he says. He's trying to do something different with his life. And that's the change of not using punishment of torture punishment, whether people see that as, whether they see it as torture or not. Because the trick is, people think, well, what did they do? And this is kind of what they deserve. And what else will the prisons do? Because they might all run amok. These are all this rhetoric that runs around the use of solitary confinement. It's protecting guards. But right now, the prisons are all violent. The more restrictive they get, the more violence they get. The worse you do, the worse element you're going to get out of people.
What you're saying is it's counterintuitive. There's this kind of like caveman part of your brain. It's like somebody did something bad, and we're locking them away forever, and that's going to take care of the problem, right? And then it does the opposite. So like, then if you turn that around on your head, and it's like somebody did something bad, but solitary doesn't help. So we're going to try to do things like rehabilitative focus and mental health support. Like in Colorado, their former corrections director said that staff assaults went down, so staff are safer, and self-harm attempts went way down. So the people who are in prison are safer because they're not harming themselves, they're not getting those, you know, acting out on that harm to mental health.
It's the respect. Even when you feel like you're on opposite sides, but there's a general amount of respect, that grows into how you conduct yourself with each other. You know, one, getting a chance to deal with yourself and get your self-understanding and coping skills. And then two, having enough respect that I know if I reach out, it's not going to turn into some type of punishment. Because maybe I did self-harm. And there, if you self-harm, you end up in the hole. that's what you end up in the hole.
I
so like, why would I tell?
You lapse, you don't.
Yeah, because the irony of it is like, oh, I'm reaching out. Yeah, I get what I'm doing is, you know, terrible result. You know, it's terrible, but it's an expression people do. Yet I decide to reach out because I'm like, hey, I want some sort of assistance for whatever I got going on. I'm reaching my hand out, and for that result, I go in the hole. I go sit in there, and then we'll send somebody medical to talk to you, and we'll keep you in the hole for a while. Like, where does that go for that person?
So there is possibility to turn things around a little bit, and there are two different bills that State Senator Tony Vargas introduced, and one of those would implement those Mandela rules where no longer could people be put in solitary confinement for more than 15 days at a time. We'd basically say that that thing that the United Nations says is torture, we're not going to do it anymore. And then the other bill right now, corrections, even though state law bans putting people with serious mental illnesses in solitary confinement, they're still doing that because they say, well, we've got them on some kind of drug treatment, so it's managed, so we're going to put this person with schizophrenia in solitary confinement. So this would stop that practice. You were really involved in passing the juvenile solitary confinement ban. I think your leadership got it done. So what's the path forward, you think? How can folks help pass these two bills in 2022?
One is definitely using your voice, and that's different aspects, of course, speaking to your neighbor, your family, whatnot, and having a discussion. But it's also voting when you see them things. But first, look into that. If you have doubts or you're like, yeah, I don't really want to hear this, but you took a moment to hear this, go pull up 10 pieces of research on solitary confinement, on the use of the whole, and see if it's beneficial. Don't let people just sit there and get up there and say, hey, look at my uniform. Solitary confinement is keeping people safe. Because we've had uniforms throughout history that's shown us many, many aspects of the human nature when authority starts to overthink their power and underthink the detriment to the people they're dealing with. And this is not just people in the prison, as we spoke, and as Nico Jenkins showed, asking for help for his mental health, saying I'm losing, and he was really losing. He has a whole history of trauma, and without going into all of that, in the end, they just cut him. They kept him in the hole many years, and then they just cut him loose, and everything he said he was gonna do, he just went out there and went on a spree. And the effects of treating him like a human being, allowing him to get that assistance, may not have cut him loose, may not have ended up to his release. But one, he would have been treated like a human being and got some treatment, and maybe he had to go live in a region center and figure it out. Mm-hmm. And hopefully he could be a human being. But the end results that society should see is 4 people would be alive. We wouldn't never hear about this story. We wouldn't know that effect, and that's what we want. We want the effect of not knowing that there could have been a victim here because you changed this path. So there's no victim to even talk about. We're not even aware of it. So, use your voice, speak to your neighbors, do your research. Nobody here is asking you to blindly follow.
We don't get a universe 2. We can't hop over there and say, in this parallel universe, did the Nico Jenkins story play out differently? But you can't look at that and say, he came out better than when he went in, right?
Absolutely.
Nobody, no matter what your perspective is on that community tragedy, can look at that and think that. So the evidence says it. Medical professionals say it, mental health professionals say it, and the United Nations says it. So hopefully Nebraska is next on up in 2022. Thank you so much for watching and tuning in for this conversation. It really helps us if you like the video, if you put a comment in the comments section, and if you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a conversation. And let us know what you want us to talk about next, because we do want to hear from you. Thanks so much.